Hello and welcome to the Radiate Wellness Podcast with your host, metaphysician, Reiki master, and hypnotherapist, Christy Clemens Hoffman. Each week, we will discover teachings, tips, and tools to radiate your best life ever with practitioners, authors, and luminaries to help you on your path. Wellness, joy, peace, abundance. What do you want to radiate?
Hello and welcome back to the Radiate Wellness Podcast. Today we radiate myth with Colm Holland, who is a return guest, and Dean Wilkinson, a fellow Yank, and they are going to be discussing the book that they co-edited that is The True Origin of Jesus, the Myth Behind the Man. Interesting stuff. When I heard about, Colin, you got in touch with me. When I heard about this book, I said, yes, that sounds fascinating. So welcome to you both.
Thank you, Christine.
Join us today.
Thank you.
It's wonderful.
Thank
Dean,
you.
I must say, I love you've got a thing behind on your mantle. Live like it's true. I kind of feel like that is the theme of this book, perhaps.
It is. It's the theme of my life, right? So I remember when I first started discovering Jesus and trying to figure out what it was about, I said, could a regular man live like that was true? And and of course I never have gotten there, but that's my thought.
Well, and what does it harm to live like it's true? He had some amazing truths and he did some amazing teachings and did some remarkable things, at least the myth. So, what's wrong with living like it's true? Of course, the jury is out. None of us were around to know for sure.
Right.
All right. So let's start on this book. This book was originally written by Geoff Roberts, who is now deceased, unfortunately.
Yeah, sadly.
Why did you decide to re-edit it, refresh it, and republish it?
Geoff published it, self-published him 10 years ago at a time when it was really hard to self-publish and actually get your book found. Right. And not many people found this book, and it went out of print straight away, almost. So maybe sold a couple of hundred copies, that was all. I found it through a colleague of mine who was a friend of Geoff's after he was deceased. And after I read it, I thought, well, this is a book that I have on my list to write. I was going to write this book. And I knew how many years of work it would take to write this book. And so when I saw that Geoff had written already done the work, I approached his wife and his daughter who hold the rights and said, I think I have a publisher. So John Hunt Publishing decided that the book was definitely worth republishing under a new title. So in the old days, Geoff published it as Jesus 888, which is the divine numerology for who Jesus was. But that only told one fraction of the story of the true origins of Jesus. Yes, there is definitely evidence to show that the myth of Jesus, which is what we see in the New Testament, came out. One of the roots that it came out of was numerology, but there were at least eight other origins in there. So the book basically says, in a nutshell, that it is almost impossible for any educated person to find any factual evidence for the existence of Jesus of Nazareth as portrayed in the New Testament. So whether there was a Jesus who predated the Jesus of the New Testament or not, that's covered in the book. Was there a guy like Jesus around 100 years before or whatever? Maybe there was. But other than the New Testament itself and some very spurious, much later pieces of evidence that seem to just appear out of nowhere in the Catholic Church later, it's very hard for anybody to say, yeah, Jesus actually, factually, historically existed. And that was at a time when lots of people were recording most of the major events. So, during Roman times, there was a lot of people recording history. So it's not like, these were the Dark Ages. These were very academic. This was an academic period of time, post-Greek, early Roman. And so it's really hard to prove that. So what difference does that make? If you believe in Jesus Christ of the New Testament, or what does it matter? Well, it matters if your faith is reliant and totally dependent on a historical Jesus. If you need Jesus to have been a real person, and you can go even further, a real person who was born of a virgin. We're nearly up to Christmas, so let's talk about that. Born of a virgin in a stable with oxen and sheep and so forth, and all of that, and with the wise men and the shepherds and all that. If you need that to be factual, then probably don't read this book.
It'll shake you up unless
you go
on the journey.
A little stick of dynamite.
Interestingly enough, there were other religions who reported virgin births, who had deities of virgin birth, who had died and resurrected three days later, who had a period of 40 days, 40 nights of questioning. So, I mean, this is not unique.
No, not at all.
Unique. And, if you need to believe in the actual Jesus, I like the way you said that, Colm. It can be answered, right? There's all the apologetics in there that can get you even more confused, but does it need to be factual? And that's why we wanted to really come out and say it doesn't need to be factual for it to be true for you. And for you to live like it's true.
Live like it's true, right. Oh, no, that's fascinating. Yeah, it doesn't have to be. So interesting. So Geoff's background, what was that? Why did he write it?
Interesting. So Geoff was not a theologian. He was not a churchgoer. He was an investigative journalist. So he's spent his life photographing and exploring the facts around stuff that was going on in the world that he lived in. He grew up in Liverpool, in England, in the UK, and he was a very highly respected guy for finding out the facts as a journalist, and so he just decided that there wasn't, in his experience, a book that was available to anybody who just had even just a curious interest of whether or not it was possible to prove there was an historical Jesus. And he wanted to take all of those big theological tomes that he discovered that covered this in great, great detail, which nobody's ever going to read, in The Man in the Street or The Woman at Home. They're just not going to read this stuff. And so he said, okay, I'll put it into one book in a way that, if I understand it, then other people can understand it. So he made the truth accessible, and his conclusion, which is pretty clear, is that actually the potential power of a myth of Jesus is even greater than that of an historical Jesus. In other words, the way that the human psyche and the human mind relates to mythology is more powerful than if we can prove that he was actually born in a stable in Bethlehem, for example.
Interesting. Yes. I mean, again, the story is not new and it's not unique. That has come from many, many different traditions. Fascinating. So I know that later, much later after the Bible, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Gnostic Gospels were found. The Gospel of Thomas too. How does that play into the story and the myth?
I'll quite happily let Dean take that one.
So how does it, right? That's it's a great question, and we could look at history and understand what was happening in the times when those would have been hidden in that cave. They were destroying the temple and wiping away all signs of anything that didn't agree with, what the mainstream, what kind of fake news was going on back then and how was it spread? I mean, the question, because they needed to protect these. And when the Council of Nicaea, I think it was like 300 years later, 362 or something, met and decided which Bibles were going to be, or which books were going to be inserted in the Bible. And I mean, everybody knew what would happen, so they hid away the ones that were rejected, but they went out burning and destroying everything else.
Yes.
We lost a lot of great information from that.
Absolutely. A lot of great information about that. So the jury is out, according to this book, about whether Jesus was a real life person. Why do we have the myth?
That's a great question. I'll kick off with
you
mine.
Go ahead. I'll tell you mine.
And then we'll. Dean and I have got two great versions of this, which complement each other really well. So my own background is Jungian philosophy, psychology. So the Professor Carl Jung, who was a colleague of Sigmund Freud's. One of the things that Carl Jung is so mostly famous for is his understanding that the human psyche, the way that the mind works and understands things, is made up of two distinct parts, the conscious part of the psyche and the unconscious part of the psyche. And one of the things that he was really big on was that a lot of what we think and how we behave and what we believe and what we do and what we have faith in and what, why we even get up in the morning and live the life that we live comes from the unconscious part of the psyche. In other words, we're not even hardly aware of the things that drive us. And he began to try and understand. So how can we begin to understand the psyche? How can we understand why it does what it does, within our own mind? And so he came up with this idea, which I buy into, which is that the way that the conscious mind can understand the unconscious mind is when the unconscious mind creates story, a mythology. So when the Greeks were writing their mythology, where was that coming from? Was it inspired by the gods? When the Romans were writing their mythology, when the Gnostics were writing their gospels, when the early Christians were writing their gospels, where does that come from? And he would say, because they all share similar themes and similar motivations, that they come from the unconscious. In other words, the unconscious is constantly looking for story, to create story, to embed in those stories things that bring meaning and purpose to our lives. And that's what religion is, according to Carl Jung. So religion is a mythological, it's a mechanism of the interaction of the conscious and the unconscious mind to try and make sense of why we're even here in the first place. So that's my take on myth. And so if Jesus is a myth, then according to Jung, of course, it's even more powerful than if it was fact, because what it's saying is that in that myth of Jesus, we can find true meaning. If the myth of Jesus is doing its job properly, then yes, it can be transformative. Yes, it can change lives. Yes, it can. Billy Graham, in my day, predates a lot of your listeners, I know, but, the Reverend Billy Graham, when he went to theological college, he had the same dilemma. When Billy Graham went to theological college, he discovered that it ain't necessarily so what you read in the Bible. And he had to make a decision. In other words, do I go with the myth as it is in the New Testament, or do I start criticizing it? And he decided to go with the myth, and he devoted his life to the myth, and millions of people's lives were transformed through his work. But in private, and even in his autobiography, he does say that actually he realized that It's really the power within the story that is actually changing lives, not necessarily the truth of the story. So truth, as Dean and I, and certainly Carl Jung and Geoff, who wrote the book, understand it, truth lies in knowing what is right and what can direct our lives, rather than depending on it actually happening on a certain day, on a certain time, in a certain place. That there's two different kinds of truth. Religious truth, transformational truth, lies in the world of mythology. So that's my
What's your take on it, Dean? What's your take on it?
On why do we need the myth anyway? Yeah. Is that the question?
Yeah.
So just taking off where Young, stop there. But we need it it's here already. It's in our collective conscious, not just unconscious. And because of that, when you look at the breaking away, when this information starts to break through mind, things are a little bit confusing about how to live. What is my purpose then? What is my meaning? If I start questioning these major foundational places where we grew up, and this influence, almost everyone has a personal story about what Jesus means. So what do you do with that? Do you, oh my gosh, that was all lies? That hurt me so much. And then I've got more wounds because we got enough of those, right? We need to heal from, and we got to get through. And if you follow the path, some of the things that are in there, you take the Sermon on the Mount, for example. I mean, I see a transformative message there. Almost, no, it is magical. So it has some of the magical roots, the Egyptian roots in it, that Jesus would have been exposed to along the Silk Road if he didn't just go there himself. We don't really know. Again, too little information. But since he's so cultivated into our cultures, then what do? Well, when I first said, okay, let me find out how this Bible was created. Who decided what books were in this Bible when I found out there were other ones? I found it. It took me a little digging, but I found the website, and I remember saying, I'm going to find the truth here, and I shut my laptop because I was scared of what that was going to do, because my hero was Jesus. See, I think he was a badass, not a Sunday school teacher.
Yeah. It sounds almost like you're a reformed fundamentalist.
Well, that's where I started in the Christian journey. Some tent revival when I was a kid, we wandered in and, shirtless and shoeless and the whole bit. And then, kind of ignored it. And then I became an adult. And then that was a fundamentalist church that I first went to. And it was a free one, the one I left at the end, right? It was this journey that let go of more and more of the lies about what God is and who Jesus was, and especially the Christ, right? Which Jesus never claimed that title. Right. But the Christ itself, that's been around, the idea has been around, is in the Old Testament. You find it, right? Like, and I couldn't leave it, but I did. I tried, and it knocked things around too much. So I said, and then when I ran into Colm and his Jungian knowledge, it was like, it was okay that I choose to still believe the myth. It's okay. And it's worked for me. And that's the ultimate, when it's matters of faith, does it work for you? Believe what you want. This has got another connotation. Believe whatever you want, whatever you've discovered, then live like it's true. See if it works. And if it works, keep doing it.
Did you know that Radiate Wellness is more than just a podcast? That's right. We're also a comprehensive, holistic wellness practice. Find out about our services, practitioners, and upcoming events at radiatewellnesscommunity.com. While you're there, visit our podcast page to read more about our great guests and even donate to the podcast. If you like our podcast, you can help in other ways as well, like subscribe or follow us wherever you're listening right now. Tell a friend, a family member, or a coworker about the great content you find here. And if you wouldn't mind, please give us a thumbs up, a 5-star rating, or a positive review. Sounds like a small thing, but it really helps. You might like to know about our Facebook communities while we're at it. We have a free community, the Radiate Wellness Community, on Facebook for news and great free content. Our subscribers group is Radiate U, as in the letter U, but also, well, you. There you'll find curated replays of past classes, guest interviews, and more. And now, back to our podcast and back to our guest.
You know, there are so many who profess to believe and to follow Christ and his teachings, and, so many fall short, drift into judgment, into persecution, et cetera, which is antithetical to his teachings. Very interesting. So how did the two of you meet each other?
I'm trying to remember, actually. We knew somebody.
It was a shared friend, someone I had met in other circumstances when I was investigating, now not the Bible anymore, but I was investigating everything else, all the mystery religions. And she was a Reiki teacher in charge of a mystery school, and she knew Colm. And she introduced us, said, you two would like each other. And we did. And we've been talking since.
I can see where you two would really have a lot to mesh around. And, it's interesting, such different backgrounds and such different courses of study in a way, but not. It's a complementary relationship is what it looks like. Yeah. Okay, well, let's get back to the book. So we know that this is myth, and myth is absolutely needed and absolutely necessary to just understand our greater truths, et cetera. So and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, if Jesus is a myth, where do we get all the stories in the Gospels from?
You need to read the book.
Yes, I know. Yes, everybody needs to read the book, but I'm sure this is a question that not only I would have, but others would have as well.
We can't do it justice in the short time we've got, but I'll give it a go. I'll pick a couple of.
Give it a go, and I'll give a little side one. It'll be
we've got a couple. Okay, so there was a tipping point for me when I was reading this particular manuscript that Geoff wrote, and it was about something that really fascinated me for years, which is the evidence of Buddhism within the Gospels in the New Testament. Well, certainly in two of them in particular, both Matthew and Luke, and particularly around, as Dean said earlier, the Beatitudes. Two different versions, of course. One talks about the poor and the meek and the downtrodden in a physical sense. That's sort of Luke, and then in Matthew you've got the same sort of sentiment, only he talks in spiritual terms. And Christian theologians over the years have tried to work out where this came from. And they came up with this thing called Q, the letter Q, which is also German for source. So for the last...
Wait a minute. Like QAnon?
No, just the letter Q.
No.
The letter Q.
Nothing, no. We're talking 100 years ago.
This unnamed source, it doesn't have a name except they named it Q.
Q.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
they called it Q.
Yes.
Okay. So if you decide to study Christian theology and you go to theological college you will learn about Q. It's one of the things that it's like, this is the latest thing we know about the New Testament and its origin. And what it means is that they believe there was a bulk of writing that existed before the Gospels were written. And this writing, or this word of mouth was being passed around those early Christian communities, and it was forming the basis of the belief of those people, which is all good, sounds great, sounds very sound, and so on. And I bought into that. So for me, for many years, 20, 30 years, that explained why we've got these seemingly completely disparate pieces of scripture that don't really compare to the other bits of Christian writings in the Gospels. So, fine. And then I came across a Buddhist scholar. His name was Christian Lindner, and he's Danish. And he had no relationship to Christianity whatsoever. He was a professor of Sanskrit, which is ancient Indian written language. And he would be called upon by lots of ancient Buddhist academics who study ancient Buddhism to translate. If they found new documents, they would ask him to translate them, because he was one of the few people who could translate from ancient Sanskrit into English and Danish and other languages. So very highly sought after guy, brilliant academic. And so he was given some manuscripts about 20 years ago, and he started to translate them. And he started scratching his head and going, I know this. I've read this before. Where? Well, these names and this, not only that, but the pentameter of the verse in which they're written, it seems to ring a bell. And so he carried on and finished the work, and then went off and thought, well, let me think where I may be able to find that. And he in the course of his investigation, he picked up the New Testament and started to read the New Testament in Danish, probably, I think it was. And he thought, oh, okay, I've just read this. Only I've just read this in manuscripts 200 years that predate when these were written. So he took a year out and went and learned ancient Greek so he could read the New Testament in Greek. And then he put the two side by side. So he put the Greek verses and the Sanskrit verses together, and then he started to cross-reference them. And lo and behold, what he discovered was that in many cases, particularly the one that really stood out to him was the story of Martha and Mary and the raising of Lazarus. Incidents from the life of St. Peter, word for word, same names, same pentameter, same stories. And so he decided to approach his local theological college and said, I think I may have found a stick of dynamite. Are you interested or not? And there was one theologian in the university who said, yes, I'm interested. Can you show me what you've discovered? And he did. And she said, I'd like you to come and teach. Or give a talk at a conference we're holding next year, all about Q, source Q.
Yes.
Because I think you've got something to inform us on that. And so he did, and he stood up after they'd all been talking all day, and he started to quote the Sanskrit scriptures, and he was everybody except 5 people walked out.
Can't say as I'm surprised.
They walked out when he asked them a question, and the question was, how many of you can read Sanskrit? How many of you have ever bothered to think that Sanskrit might be important? That here are the ancient Buddhist scriptures that may have influenced the New Testament? Or are you so isolated in your theological world that you cannot even entertain that there may even be something almost identical that exists in another world that has influenced this? And he said, I'm not drawing any conclusions from this, I'm just pointing it out. He said, I'm not a theologian. It's not for me to decide what this means for Christianity or what it means for Christian theology. He said, I wouldn't have a clue. But I just thought you guys should know, because it's the truth. Because, I found it, and here it is. And so Geoff found Christian Lindner's work And so in Geoff's book, The True Origins, he covers that whole incident in great detail. So was one of the influences of the New Testament on the myth of Jesus in the New Testament, was that drawn from Buddha and from the character of Buddha and the life of Buddha as told in ancient Buddhism? Was it drawn, are passages from the New Testament drawn from ancient Sanskrit documents? The answer is yes. Yes, it is. And I hate to be the bearer of shocking news, if this is shocking news to somebody who's listening to your podcast, Christy. We're not doing this to try and destroy anybody's faith, because we're not talking about faith. We're talking about academia and and of course what a lot of Christian theologians in the past have said, which is quite convenient, because the devil made this stuff up. In other words, the devil wrote that in the Sanskrit text to try and throw people away from believing in the factual teachings of Jesus. So
right,
I can't argue with that. I've got no argument against that whatsoever.
Yes, and that's why I was not surprised that anybody walked out of that lecture, because people are so entrenched in their faith.
Yeah,
and
but they've also been getting paid to kind of be the guys who know what it's all about. And
theologians, that is, but not the everyday person, right? The person who was influenced growing up by the church and the story of Jesus. That person, how important their faith is. Well, working in the church for so long and being a leader in the church and counseling people and doing the healing work, that was the way it was done in church, was, counseling with somebody and praying with them in that particular denomination's way. Here's the thing. The story wasn't freeing anybody. They weren't getting healed. Their faith was based upon what someone told them their faith was. And I kept wondering why. Hold it, I'm digging in and I'm learning more and more about what's going on. I want to try to live like this thing is true, because I'm feeling free. And we're kind of pitching freedom from the pulpits. But at the end of the day, our people are still enslaved to their what they call their faith, the guilt, though, that it causes, and the shame and the fear that it doesn't release you from. It's not, your faith isn't working until I'm no longer afraid. I no longer feel guilty. I am created to be on this earth for a purpose, and to find that purpose and work in that purpose. We weren't doing that in the Christian church, in my opinion.
I 1000% agree, Dean. Taking these teachings and these parables and then turning them on their ear and turning them into a tool for something other than it is, right? But but the nature of faith is what you said. It's like you believe it. You might not be able to explain it or know why you believe it, but you do, right? Being told doesn't make you believe it. It just creates this false evidence of faith. Very interesting. In your publication materials, your publicity materials, you talk about astrology and numerology in the Bible. And I thought that was very interesting, because that's something I truly have faith in, is that there is an order to the universe, there is a system to the universe, and many things fall into that system. So can you talk about how astrology and numerology do play a part in the early teachings in the Bible?
It's the one area topic that I'm the least knowledgeable about, Christy. So I'll own up to my very very limited lack of knowledge, apart from what I've read in the book. Right. But I will tell you this, that in the world of astrology, and as we go through various epochs in astrology, which you will know, the rising of Christian faith happened at a juncture. It's actually happening in an astrological juncture as we're coming out of the epoch of Pisces, of the fish, and coming into the era of Aquarius, of water. So if you put those glasses on, if you put your astrological glasses on, and then you go into the scriptures, particularly the Gospel of John, then what you'll discover is there are multiple references. Even the fact that Jesus approached fishermen, and he would talk about casting your net on the other side. I will make you fishers of men. I mean, repeated and repeated references to fish, to fishing, and so on. Well, anybody who knew astrology, even in those times, would go, aha, here's another piece of evidence that this Jesus, this Christ, that these Christians are talking about, is also part of what you just called, Christy, the plan, within the universe. So he's representing this period of change, because then in the Gospel of John, what Jesus went on to talk about is out of, anyone who believes in me, said Jesus, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. So you get, if you're driving on the freeway, which I used to do going into Los Angeles when I lived in that area for some time, you'd see two kinds of stickers on the back on bumper stickers. There'd be the fish, so you know who they were. But then you would also sometimes see living waters, Jesus represented that transition of those epochs from fish to, and why that's important is that according to Aquarius, and you probably, Christy, you should really talk about this, not me, but the whole point of Aquarius is that there is this new opening of consciousness. We're entering into a new age. Jesus Christ Superstar, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, I mean, they nailed it. And so when the hippie movement in particular, which I got swept up in the 70s, that was, we did genuinely feel that we were, late 60s actually, I mean, we did feel that we were entering into a new age of enlightenment. This was, our minds were able to be opened afresh, and that we could question things, and it was okay to question things. That wasn't true. That wasn't necessarily the true. So Jesus heralded in, if you like, the new age of Aquarius from an astrological. Does that help? Does that answer? As for numerology, I can't speak on it. I really am not an expert on that at all. You will have to read Geoff's book. He was an expert on it. He'd studied it a lot.
Right. Dean, did you have anything to add to that?
No, not better than that. So.
Right. I mean, I've heard even that the 12 disciples represented the 12 houses of the zodiac with their own personality and agenda, which I thought was very, very interesting. I mean, you can read so much into this. I do believe it's something that it is so big that you can apply many things to it, and it can apply to many things as well. So,
and that's why it's good that's why we're saying it's good to investigate it. There are a lot of people that have wandered away from church, millions a year for the last decade and over the last decade, who are out there with either some hurt around this or confusion around this, or downright don't know how to even engage in the conversation when it comes to the story of Jesus, because it meant so much. But what if you can add in and look at all the different sources, from numerology to astrology to what happened in between the history moments, what is recorded, you can almost tell what would have happened to all of our factual. But you can also see what happened to the myth, because it made the myth stronger. Right. And just because the person of Jesus may or may not exist. It does not mean that Christ's spirit hasn't existed the whole time. And that's what we're after. That's the unconditional love. That's the, faith, hope, love. I think that's even a numerological or a alchemist, foundational arithmetic problem. Faith, hope brings you to love. There's what about that? And then you got the Kabbalah, who in the Old Testament, there's all kinds of pieces of numerology that I have not been able to study either that fit in there. So why not grasp what you can? Because the part that's in your heart, the one that you want to grasp, you'll just levitate towards that, but know that it's okay. And there's no right or wrong. We don't need to bash each other, because every religion, every mystery or mainstream is drawing us back to being one, bringing us to the oneness, right? Absolutely. You can see that happening. And that's all Jesus was doing. And the stories that did get in there. And I don't know how some of them got in there. I've really, I said, okay, he must have said this so many times that somebody remembered it, right? Because they weren't following around with a pad and or a papyrus and a pen. They weren't doing it. So, but it's fun to play here, if it's okay to play here for you.
Oh, absolutely. And I do feel like this book is, in a way, tailored to those who maybe have had religious trauma. What would you say about that?
This book, I think the religious trauma, from what I've heard of the tone, is everyone's angry. So my first message, like you get those one-on-one messages sometimes that it's just for you, was when I got, it was God doesn't care. And I felt like, it could have been Jesus, the Christ Spirit, saying it right to me. And when I realized that was true, I wanted to get angry. But then I realized, no, because I was friends with pastors. They genuinely wanted to help people. That's why they were there. They were just inside of something that they were never even allowed to question. Or if they did ever question it, they made a decision earlier than us and said, we're going to live like it's true, like Billy Graham did, like that in that story you said, Colm.
Yeah.
And I get it.
As I'm a Reiki healer myself, as well as a hypnotherapist, and I see so many people coming to me for help because of the religious trauma. The programming that told them that they were not worthy, the programming that told them that they were born guilty and will never be okay and never be good. And just you have to go to church no matter what. And if you don't, you're going to suffer horrible consequences. That type of thing. And that is so ingrained in many of today's communities and religions. Yeah.
And it's that original sin, right? That original sin lie, the original sin that we're separated.
Right.
So, that was around when Jesus was around. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's the lie. There was no separation. We read into the story some kind of separation and that we were bad. It's not in the Bible. There are so many things that we took on foundationally that when we bring them back together, because that is what got me most interested in epic work, Christy, is that the people are stuck, and you're going to have to do the work to get unstuck here. Mm-hmm. But don't blame it on anyone. There's the reason you were so entrenched and so desirable because the myth of Jesus is so compelling, and the desire to be that. Those experiences you had were real. They were still real. And if we can just grab a hold of that and let go of that anger and let go of that blame and take responsibility for it, we'll become who we are, who we were created to be here.
I love that. And you do mention Epic Work, which is your website, which is epicwork.com.
Yes.
Tell about that for a minute, if people aren't familiar.
So the epic work part is where I help blue collar or tradespeople become their fullest selves. And, most of this stuff is around the soft skills and the people skills and the business skills they need to be able to do that on the outside. And of course, we go on the inside, I see where they want to go. And I haven't found one person yet that isn't stuck or entrenched in the Jesus story. Most are stuck. If they get in that conversation with me, they know I'm going to challenge that. But the first message I got was God doesn't care. And then I went out to prove that was true. And I only went to the Bible to prove it. And it's all in there. God doesn't care about this. The whole thing is bringing us back to oneness without guilt, without shame, so that we can fully be who we are. And that's what I'm trying to do at Epic Work.
Right. Back to that fullness and oneness and the love that, like the one love that we all ultimately should share, but maybe don't. I mean, it just kind of brings me back to that was the central message. But I can see where that might be problematic at the time that it was written. And sometimes it's problematic now, because how can this love, this oneness exist with you are not worthy, you are guilty, you're born guilty, you'll never be good enough, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, to the point where I'm just thinking, how did this make it through all of the cuts of the Bible, this message of love? How did that even get to be the central tenet?
Well, you have to dig to even get to that central tenet. But what if there's a lot of power in that mystery, right? What if Jesus was influenced by all the other Egyptians and numerology and astrology? He would have been very powerful, which the story has him powerful, right? Does this exist? And I think it's in there. I think just what I found about initiates and traveling in the mystery religions, you get one level of knowledge, but right under those words is a second level. And that's obvious in the story, right, that we do have in the main parts of the Bible, but there's probably a deeper knowledge. And when you go into Kabbalah and the word, the real power is to create your reality, to not be a victim, to say, hey, this is what I have. These are the resources I have right now. What can I make out of it? What can I create out of it? I am now living with the God power inside of me, because that's the way we were designed. And what's really, really cool is science is backing up all the spiritual findings today. So what spirituality has been claiming for centuries, science is saying, oh, here's how you stack this together to be the high performance human being or peak performance human being, whatever language they use. It's amazing what today is if we can let go of the past and embrace those pieces that work for us.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, even the message that the kingdom of God is within, that all that I do, you can do and more, just that you don't need an intercessor to reach God and to be a good person. All of that, I can't imagine that it's not seen as dangerous by some just because it gives more power and control over to the individual, which seems kind of antithetical to what some of these churches have done over the, 2,000 years. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, wouldn't the church have wanted us not to be powerful?
That's what I'm saying.
That they would have wanted it then, right? And the message would have been different. But the funnel the money, funnel the power, even the leaders, the political leaders were under the popes, right? They went to the popes to control the crowd. So it was keep the power here at top. And we're in a world now where the information's just going to anyone with a cell phone. We know there's power in knowledge.
Yeah.
Right. So, but not in knowledge that we learn and are forced to learn. Power and knowledge and how this world works, how it was designed to work, how we were designed to work in it and to make the most of it. That's God created creators to create. What else would he have created? And so there's a lot of reason to push that down at the beginning of this when it was
That's what I'm saying.
But now it's almost senseless. Now there's some, I don't even know if they're trying anymore. Churches are getting more and more open to new ideas. But I don't know, because I'm not in the world as much, but my daughter's in the world and she, there's a big church that she is a leader of. And when I tell her my ideas, we talk about this all the time. not in church, but amongst us, So what's happening that we don't even know?
I think it depends on the church, though.
Absolutely. Yeah. The Catholic Church would be some more fun.
Oh, well, it depends which branch of the Catholic Church as well. Yeah,
more fundamental would say, but yeah.
Exactly. That, the power is top down, and Jesus is saying you've got the power from the bottom up.
From inside out, actually.
From the inside, yes. But yeah, it's better even than that. So, right, that you get the power from the inside out. So
I'd love to talk to you. We don't have time today, but I believe the Beatitudes hold that message inside of them. In the original language, it becomes obvious.
Absolutely. I would love to talk to you about that more. Maybe we'll have you back for another episode just to talk about the Beatitudes, because that would be very interesting. Anything? Okay, so we are out of time. But is there anything else that either of you think is important we haven't gone over or haven't talked about?
In the end, it all boils I think we have talked about it. It does all boil down to love, unconditional love. In the end, Christy. And that's what motivates me and Dean, for sure. And it motivated Geoff to write the book because the final truth is that unconditional love is the final power that can manifest not only within ourselves, but in the world around us when we commit ourselves to it. So, yeah, I'd agree with that.
And I would be completely remiss, Colm, if I did not mention that you were the person who brought The Alchemist to the rest of the world.
Yes.
So from the obscure shelf in South America, brought it out to everybody's bookshelf around the world. So I love that work, and I love that you were able to see the power in it and bring it out. Yeah.
Thank you.
And of course, the book is The True Origins of Jesus, the Myth Behind the Man by Geoff Roberts, but edited by Colm Holland and forward by Dean Wilkinson. So this has been absolutely fascinating, and I really appreciate your time and your patience with meeting with me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Christy.
Radiate Wellness is an international community of holistic and alternative healers dedicated to helping you create spiritual, energetic, and physical well-being. To learn more about our practitioners, services, classes, and events, or to schedule an appointment, visit us at radiatewellnesscommunity.com.